Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you are joining me here today. I am grateful for you and your willingness to open your heart and mind and soul and work on your growth and expansion of yourself, to heal, to break generational trauma, to be a better version of yourself. So if you want to be a more emotionally available parent, partner, friend, boss, take your leadership skills to the next level, we know that we have to deconstruct what lies within. Maybe some of the conditioning, the beliefs that you have been taught, brought up with, cultural messages that we're getting on social media from different places and leaders in our life. And it's time to take a look at the reflection in the mirror, not our body image, what's reflected in our spirit. Asking yourself, what do I want? Not what do I think I should do? Should equals shame. And we're going to be talking about the difference between shame and guilt that universally everybody experiences, how to work through it, and identifying when shame and guilt drive you to make decisions, and when you're functioning from a place of guilt and shame, and what happens in your life as a result. And I'm going to share some personal examples of how I work through this. I'm going to be using a lot of material from the book by Hilary Jacobs Hendel. We will tag the episode that she was on. She wrote a book called It's Not Always Depression. I highly recommend you get this book because it's critical to you working through your shame and guilt. Also, highly recommend a lot of Dr. John Bradshaw's book. If you've listened to me a while, you know I like his books. There's a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You. He's really the pioneer when it comes to putting out this idea of toxic shame and how and where it stems from. He really came before Dr. Brene Brown, who talked about shame. And I highly recommend those books as well as any of Dr. Brene Brown's books. I like Rising Strong, The Gifts of Imperfection. Those are great ones to start with. So I highly recommend getting Healing the Shame That Binds You and Homecoming by Dr. John Bradshaw. And then It's Not Always Depression by Hilary Jacobs Hendel and any of Dr. Brene Brown's books. Before we jump into today's topic, I highly recommend you get the journal that's free that I recommend to anybody on a growth and expansion journey. You can get it for free at Kristen, Kristen, dboyce.com/free resources. Grab that. I also recommend you get on the newsletter so you continue to take in new concepts, looking within yourself, because we know the number one thing to growth is self-awareness. Whether you're a leader in your home, in a company, in a relationship, in a neighborhood, it doesn't matter. It's so critical to have self-awareness. And I work with that with my children as well. Understanding what your feelings are, why you might be feeling them, where in your body you might be experiencing those emotions. The more self-aware you are, the more we can have an understanding in terms of why did I have that reaction and then how to work through it. If you're not self-aware, it's hard to teach that to your children because you're going to shy away from any kind of talk about emotions. If you're uncomfortable with anger, because people get anger and rage really mixed up. Everybody experiences anger. It's a universal emotion. It can help you set boundaries. Maybe you weren't raised that anger was okay, or maybe it was scary and abusive. Maybe you were raised that sadness, you weren't allowed to be sad. You had to be happy. So we wear a smile and we hide and mask what we're really feeling. So when we're really sad, we say everything's great. So it's important that when you're listening to this podcast and today's episode, I highly recommend getting pen and paper or getting your phone out, but something to take notes to really start to dig in to yourself. This isn't about, let me understand everybody else, although that's nice. The most important piece is for you to understand yourself. And then you can take ownership, take responsibility, and decide if you want to do deeper self-development work. It's hard to get unstuck if you don't want to face pain and look within, because you're going to keep doing the same patterns habitually, because that's what the brain likes to do. So I want to take a moment to break down the difference between shame and guilt. Why is that important? For you to begin to identify, what are you feeling? Is this shame or guilt? So shame makes us feel something about ourselves is bad or wrong, but guilt tells us when we have done something bad. Guilt helps ensure that we don't hurt others. Oftentimes, I'm looking within and saying, I'm looking at my choices, but really we get guilt and shame mixed up. So for example, today, I am going through what we call hormones. So if you're a female, well, men have hormones too. So not to exclude anyone. And there is a thing called perimenopause. And I'm entering that season, whether you've gone through menopause, perimenopause, or you're hormonal in any way, it impacts how you feel. And so like clockwork, this might be TMI, so feel free to skip on past if this is TMI. I hope this is relatable for some of you. There's a headache that comes along with my cycle and their migraines. And so it can be really painful. So not only are my daughters, we're all, because I have 2 teen daughters. So you can imagine all the hormones, and we're at the same point, the same cycle. And so my daughter was having headaches and cramps and everything. And so then the next day I'm having headaches and cramps and heating pad. Long story short, I was hemorrhaging. So I really needed to do self-care. I didn't physically feel well. And so that's not like me until I have my cycle. So I nurtured myself through it. I really, really tried to use the most comforting, tender voice, because we have a judger part when there's shame. And Janine Fisher really identified this. We have a judger part that tells us what's wrong and bad with us. And then we have a victim part of us that feels sorry for ourselves, like almost like, poor me. Why is it always so hard for me? Why does everyone else have it easier? But the judger was out and saying this struggle between shame and guilt. So I had a Pilates class with a friend, and my friend is so filled with empathy and grace and love and care and compassion, because that's who I want to surround myself with, and a truth teller. So it's not like there's placating. And so I leave her a voice memo and I'm like, I am having cramps. I have a headache. I'm hemorrhaging. I do not think I can go today. And usually I push myself. And today I thought, I cannot do it. So I took a deep breath. I said a little prayer and I sent her that voice memo, and I gave myself permission to take care of myself. And when I was younger in college, I would push myself. I was sick. I would push. I was whatever. I would try to push myself through it without taking care of myself, because my guilt says, ooh, I don't want anyone to be upset with me. I don't want to be mad at me. I'm afraid I'm making bad choices. The shame says I'm a bad person for making these choices. So my shame came up and wanted to kind of say, ooh, you're not a very good friend. You're not a very good person. And I thought, no. And I talked to that tender part and I said, you are not a bad person. You need to take care of yourself. Your body is giving you information, and you need to honor your body by nurturing yourself, resting, putting a heating pad on, taking care of yourself, so then you will feel better. And if you were a child that didn't get nurtured when you were sick, this can evoke shame and guilt. So for example, in my home, my mom would get upset with me if I was sick. She'd be like, you're fine. You can go to school. When I look back on it in those years when my parents got divorced, and I so much work around this, I love inner child work. If you've worked with me or you're a client of mine, we do lots of inner child work. That's how I'm able to do the self-passion and the nurturing. I'm being the parent I didn't get. So if I was sick and my parents went through a divorce in 3rd and 4th grade, I now realize that was somaticism. I was not feeling well because I was not processing emotions. So I would get headaches. I would throw up at school, and my dad would come get me. He'd come out from work because my mom was in grad school at the time. And he would come get me from school. And he was very kind. He'd get me food and then he'd go back to work. My mom would get mad because why she was getting mad is because she was anxious. Now I realize this after all this work. She was anxious because then her day was going to change. I get that as a parent now. Your day is impacted if your child is sick. So she was going to have to miss work. She was going to have to miss her classes. And she would get anxious and her anxiety was masked with anger. So then I would feel like I was a bad person because I was sick. I would feel something's wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I should be able to handle this. And so the shame grew around sickness. And then when I had kids, the guilt around. So the guilt is I am not doing all the duties like I normally do. So I usually get up, make lunches. My husband's very good about that too. He will help make lunches. To this morning, I said, my period has come like a vengeance. I said, would you mind making the lunches today? And he said, no problem at all. You rest. And then usually we driving duties because we have two girls with two different schools. And he said, I got it. It's no problem. I can do it. Well, I'm in there feeling guilty that I'm choosing to lay in bed and rest. And then I'm like, no, this is the healthy decision. I asked for help. That's healthy. This is my process. I'm walking you through my process in real time because I am just tired of people being like, and then I just offered myself compassion. No, sometimes it works like that, but oftentimes it's a process. And I want you to hear the real reality of the process to working through shame and guilt. So I'm laying in bed feeling guilty. And then I thought, I can't do it. And it's okay for me to ask for help. He's a wonderful father. Not everybody has that, I realize. So I want to caveat this. Not everybody has help. Not everybody can have access to resources. So this is one of the privileges that I own, that I can, and he is available and willing to do it. If you're a single parent, if you have different circumstances, this isn't always the case. So I want to acknowledge that. And more importantly, I want to just know that I see you and acknowledge that. And I want to have a real life example of how to work through this. So I'm in my bed working through this guilt and shame. And I realized a lot of it goes back to my mom because my mom did not get up with me for school, really ever, that I remember, at least once I hit third grade and above. I was on my own, did my own breakfast, made my own lunch, got myself on the bus, did it all. So it brings me back to that same feeling of, oh, am I my mother doing, and my mother wasn't all bad, of course, this feeling of neglect. And I'm like, absolutely not. I'm a very emotionally available parent. Am I perfect? Heck no. It's okay. They understand. They have periods too. They get it. This is part of something they experience too. And I was able to walk my younger part of myself that felt like I was a bad mother and I should is shame, SHOULD, should. I changed it to a could, and I said I could get up, but that's not going to be in the best interest. I'm going to be short. I'm going to be irritable. I am not going to be emotionally present. If I have to do it, which I've done it many times when I had to do it for many different reasons. If Mark's traveling, Mark couldn't help, whatever, my husband, I had to do it. You push through because you have to do it. That's part of the process. I didn't have to do it today. I could take time. I could nurture myself through it. So I'm talking to myself as if it's the most compassionate person on the planet. It's the parent that you wanted, the emotionally available, compassionate parent. What does that look like? It's like, oh, sweetheart. Oh, I know how hard that is when you don't feel good. It's okay to rest, take care of yourself. Mark's got it. The girls are fine. This is what healthy looks like. You're modeling for them what it looks like to ask for help, take care of yourself, and rest and nurture yourself through it. On top of that, my friend, after I left this probably very painful voicemail message, because I was in pain at the time, she left me the most compassionate message back. And I almost want to read it to you to model what it looks like to have so much compassion for a friend and empathy, because that's some of the most important pieces of this work is knowing how to show empathy, how to show up as a friend, how to show up as a partner, a spouse, a parent. She wrote this back, and this is based on my voice memo to her. She wrote this back. Oh, Kristen, I'm so sorry. I have so much empathy for you. I'm sending you prayers that the medicine works for your migraine. I told her I took the medicine and cramps and that your flow diminishes quickly. And then she said, I have a very light day today, so please let me know if you need anything, want anything. I love you so much. Feel better soon. And that seems simple, but at the same time, didn't we want that from our parents? That compassion, not to try to fix it, not to try to, of course, sometimes if you're sick, you need certain things. You need medicine, go to the doctor, being taken care of. Ultimately, what we want from others is to be seen, known, and understood. And if we can offer that when we're in shame and guilt to ourselves, it's icing on the cake that my friend offered that to me. It was such a gift, so lovely. To offer it to yourself because you live with yourself, you're with yourself all the time. So if that judger comes online when you're in shame, saying you're a bad person, there's something wrong with you, you're defective, you're not good enough, that compassionate, tender, nurturing part of you that you have to work on accessing, growing, teaching how to be compassionate to yourself is the antidote to shame and guilt. And it's taken me a long time for me to access that part, nurture it, grow it. And now what I've learned over the years, working with people with religious trauma, spiritual trauma, judger, that they see God as the judger, which only perpetuates shame. So if we were taught that God is a big judger, then it's even harder to access the shame because we're afraid we're going to hell. We're afraid we're a bad person. We're afraid we're not a good Christian or whatever religion it is. And I've realized that is not it at all. God, light, universe, Holy Spirit, whatever that looks like for you is the most compassionate, loving, kind, caring force there is. And if you hear anything differently, that is coming from someplace else, somewhere else. Some teaching, some conditioning, some voice, some parent, grandparent, coach, teacher, bully that might have unhealthy relationship that might have stuck in your head. That is not the most loving force because love is what the purpose of all of that spirituality is supposed to be. Love, light, evolution, and growth. And so when we look at guilt keeps us in check so we can live harmoniously with other humans. In other words, it can mirror back to us some really important areas of growth. So could shame. I mean, shame and guilt are teachers for me. When I studied what's called the change triangle, that is really born out of what we call AEDP model. And basically what that essentially is, it goes through how to work through defensiveness, and it indicates that shame, anxiety, and guilt are inhibitory emotions. They're actually keeping us stuck because what underneath those emotions is core emotions. And if you've seen the movie Inside Out, or if you've listened to this podcast, you probably know the core emotions, but I want to go through them again. They are anger, which can also be a secondary emotion. What does that mean? That means you can use it to cover up deeper emotions to protect yourself. So we have anger, sadness, fear, which is under the root of a lot of these things. Fear we're not enough, fear we're going to be abandoned, fear we're going to be rejected, judged, not accepted, not liked, not belong. We're going to be all alone. Fear, disgust, which a lot of people have real fear over even going to discuss, but it's a core emotion. Joy, which sometimes we forebode joy because we're waiting for the next shoe to drop. Excitement and sexual excitement. Obviously, sexual excitement was not in the Disney movie Inside Out. They are coming up with a sequel, by the way. So later on, I think this year or next year. So be looking out for that. What the change triangle says is basically we have these defenses. These are protector parts that protect you from feeling less than. So that doesn't want you to feel shame, anxiety, guilt, any of those, doesn't want you to feel that. And so it tries to protect you from that. So that can be addictions, that can be rage. We can gossip, try to hustle for our worth with perfectionism, workaholism. I mean, there's many defenses that are listed in the It's Not Always Depression book that I highly recommend you be aware of your defenses. Super important. When you feel anxious, when you feel shame, when you feel guilt, what do you do? Do you go down? So if you're looking at the change triangle in the upper right hand, upside down triangle, and the upper right hand side is actually, in the upper right hand side, we have defenses, and knowing you're defensive. When someone says you're so defensive, that really is an indicator. You need to explore some of the survival states you were in as a child. Maybe you shut down, maybe you withdraw, maybe you go into contempt or criticism, stonewalling. We know those kill relationships. Those are the four apocalypse of relationships. Perhaps in childhood, you did that to protect yourself. Then on the other side of the upside down change triangle are anxiety, shame, and guilt. Those are inhibitory emotions. They inhibit you from moving forward. They keep you stuck if you don't nurture and work through them. As we go down the funnel, the tip of the triangle, since it's upside down, are the core emotions. That's the key to moving through to get to the other side, to get to the 7 C's: calm, clarity, connection, contentment. We are more connectable when we're processing emotions. But if I'm eating my emotions, drinking them, getting on social media, moving away from them, I mean, not all of those things, but sometimes we need to take a break from something. Maybe we're reading a book, listening to a podcast. We're really trying to understand it. Maybe we're going for a walk. Those things can be healthy because they're moving us towards working through something. If I am turning to alcohol, wine, for example, beer, whatever that looks like, and I'm moving away from what I'm feeling because I don't want to process the pain, I don't want to feel it because I never learned how to do that in a healthy way, then I'm going to probably stay stuck. And then I'm going to go between shame, guilt, and anxiety, back to defense, back to shame, guilt, and anxiety, back to defense. I'm just going to teeter totter up at the up top of that triangle, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. I will feel stuck. I will probably pass down shame, guilt, and anxiety unconsciously to my children, to other people around me, until I take ownership of it and I start recognizing my patterns. Everybody has anxiety, shame, and guilt. Everybody has defenses. And guess what? Everybody has core emotions. No one gets out of this. It's part of being a human being. What I'm inviting you into is becoming more aware and a willingness to work through it. And so sometimes guilt helps us to say, okay, we need to make a change. Shame can take us down to the dark abyss. So sometimes we feel guilty when we haven't done anything wrong except perhaps evoke feelings in others. We feel like, ooh, I hurt them. And that's okay to evoke. It's my delivery, right? Am I taking responsibility for how I'm delivering something? And when using the change triangle to help with guilt, it can start separating guilt for when we actually do something truly not okay, and guilt for when we haven't done anything objectively bad, but we feel like we have, or someone told us we have. For example, guilt we feel for having a particular need, preference, thought, or emotion. Knowing which of those two types of guilt we are experiencing is the first challenge. We work with each kind of guilt in a different way. And so what does that all mean? That all means that and this is taken directly from that excerpt, it's taken from It's Not Always Depression. And she breaks down that guilt is often from us as children. So if we were in a certain religion, we might have used guilt to instill fear so we would feel bad and not make the decision again. And sometimes what it does is we take over responsibility for other people's emotions. That's not our jobs, especially our parents. So when we were blamed for things, for example, let's say your mom said, well, you hurt me. Your sadness hurts me. Then you're going to be like, ooh, that's not okay for me to feel sad. Then I'm going to feel guilt about it. And then guilt often leads to shame. That's the other thing. They're like partners, so to speak. Guilt makes us feel shame that I'm a bad person. I feel bad about hurting, like my words, which is a choice, hurt my mom. I didn't choose to hurt my mom, but I said a certain thing. My mom probably has unprocessed trauma feelings that she's not processing. And now I feel responsible. So now I feel like I'm a bad person and now I feel anxious. You see how all those are tied together? It's so important we start recognizing how these all work together and how you have developed shame. And one of the things I think was really important that she shares in the book, and I want to go back to it. I had it marked. There's so much to say on it, but oftentimes shame, we didn't come in with shame. Shame was developed over time and from our childhood. So there's 9 ways to begin working with your shame. And this is from It's Not Always Depression. I wanted to highlight some of these. Number 1, you were not born feeling shame about yourself. Know that shame is learned. Number 2, know that shame is not your fault, even though our shame tells us it is. Number 3, know that as adults, we can learn skills and get help to handling shame, like learning to manage rejection. We can gain enough confidence to take chances and come out of hiding. There is always hope. Number 4, know that you can surround yourself with friends and partners who accept and love you for you. You can find people with whom you can safely share your accomplishments and failures. You can find people to share joy and excitement. You can find people who share your interest in being real and authentic. So shame likes to stay in the dark and stay in hiding. So the more you hide, the more shame grows. And Dr. Brené Brown talks about this. It's like taking it in a petri dish, and if you don't douse it with the light, it grows. Shame then, when you douse it with the light, ceases. And so we want to bring it to the light, whether you're talking to a therapist, you're starting to write it in your journal about how you feel defective, not good enough, bad, wrong, however that looks for you. And then starting to process the emotions that lie underneath it. We start then learning healthy ways to cope with it by crying, getting it out, journaling, walking, EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing that you can do with a therapist. Maybe you're doing some somatic experiencing, that's body work. Maybe you're doing some self-care, music, pets. I mean, there's many ways. Listening to something that inspires you, podcasts. There's many ways to work through shame. But if we keep it in the dark and we hide it, which is exactly what shame wants to do, then we don't have hope of moving through the shame because we don't want to face it. So let's say, for example, I have this belief at a moment in time, I'm a bad parent. If I keep that in the dark and I don't acknowledge that I'm feeling that and say, oh, I can feel the shame in my body. I feel flushed. I feel like I want to shrink. I feel like I want to hide. I feel like I'm not equipped for this, whatever the negative belief I have about myself. If I don't tend to it, which is for me, it's journaling, it's maybe going to therapy, it's talking to a friend, it's listening to a podcast, it's all these things, going for a walk, connection, talking it out with my husband, a friend, whomever, it's dealing with it. Then I can move through it and get to the nurturing part of myself and get myself through it. If I just want to bury it, numb it, get on social media, move away from it, then it grows. I've just buried it. I haven't dealt with it. I've just buried it. And shame is begging us, and guilt and anxiety, to tend to it, to acknowledge it, just like with our children, whether they're adult children or they're teens or they're young. They simply just want you to offer empathy and listen. If they want your feedback, then you can offer it if they want it. They just need you to listen and hear them, look at them tenderly and compassionately. Of course, if they're yelling and cussing you out or something, you can say, it's okay to be angry. It's not okay how you're delivering that anger. Maybe they need to hit a pillow. Maybe they need to scream in a pillow. Maybe they need to break something. And I'm not kidding. Like, if you have something old you don't care about, let them get it out in a healthy way, of course. This isn't like something I'm advocating for, but I'm looking at, are we teaching ourselves, reparenting ourselves and teaching ourselves it's okay to have feelings? It's what we do with them that matters. And what we do with them is we need to tend to them, acknowledge them, nurture them, process them. We have lots of inner child podcasts on Close the Chapter. I encourage you to listen to those. I am telling you, inner child work is imperative to your healing. I feel passionate about that because I've lived it. I've walked it. I do that. If you're not doing the inner child work, when you get activated by somebody or somebody doesn't invite you or it triggers you when they say something, your kid, your friend, your partner, it's up to you to do that work, to look at why is that triggering you and how are you going to handle it? What does that remind you of? Do you need to explore that? And then maybe you need to set a clear and direct boundary. So shame often says, I'm not worthy enough, or I'm going to make them mad. And guilt makes us feel responsible for other people's stuff. And we have to separate, is that really my issue or is that someone else's issue? I've had many clients recently have the realization that their parent shame got transmitted to them and their own weight issues got projected onto their child, and it really wasn't their issue. So maybe they watched their mother yo-yo diet, going from the Atkins to no carbs, no sugar. I mean, the list is endless. Weight Watchers. And not that there's anything wrong or bad about those. It's that there's also emotional work that has to be done that has driven that yo-yo dieting. That's a whole nother episode because it takes tenderness. It takes acknowledgement of your own pain messaging that you've been given, that inner critic, the judger part, to move through shame and guilt. Universally, so much of that right now. Always has been, but now we have a term for it. So let's keep going down the 9 ways working with your shame. Number 5 was practice changing your habitual reflex to shrink and hide. And that's your protector part, wanting to protect you. Slowly start experiencing with expansive feelings like joy, interest, and excitement when they arise by acknowledging them. Notice if you immediately dismiss good feelings. I think this is huge because we're afraid, like I said, afraid that something bad's going to happen. The next shoe's going to drop. And that fear got embedded way long time ago. That's why I tell people, get off the news. Stop watching the news. And sometimes I recommend no crime shows. If you've had a lot of trauma, those crime shows activate the nervous system, just like the news does. It embeds fear. That's the purpose of the news. Sensationalism to embed fear. It creates a lot of anger as a result because it's covering up the fear. We're trying to protect ourselves with the anger. Number 6 of the 9 ways to begin working with your shame. Know that arrogance, contempt, perfectionism, pretenses, bullying behavior, and aggression in general are often a cover for the underlying shame and trauma that has not gotten processed, acknowledged, seen. So you got to recognize, is someone's shame activated? And I know in our marital dynamic, I go more towards anxiety and Mark goes more towards shame. And now that we know that, we can acknowledge each other's process. And I can say, oh, did that just trigger your shame? And he's able to say, yeah. I can say, oh my goodness, I can see that. Tell me more about it. And then I take responsibility. Maybe my words were sharp, critical, too intense. That's my responsibility. I can't control what might get invoked in him, but I can manage how I talk to him. What are my words? What's my intensity in my voice? What's my facial expressions and body language? That is on me. I can't take over ownership of what is his stuff. I can only own what's mine and communicate. We can communicate about it. Number 7, practice offering compassion to the part of you that feels ashamed or bad in the moments you are hurting the most. That's what's needed. I'm telling you, it is the answer. And if you knew that there was this loving energy out there, the Holy Spirit that loved you so much and knows you're going to make mistakes, knows that you're not going to be perfect because we are created as human beings for a reason. So we can have empathy and connection with other people. If you knew that and could internalize that, but we weren't raised like that. We were raised with this is the right and wrong behavior, black and white. This is good. This is bad. This is right. This is wrong. All or nothing. And it doesn't work like that. There's so much gray. And when we get more comfortable in our window of tolerance for the gray increases, we start healing. We start expanding. And we're less afraid of rejection and abandonment because we're healing in those inner child parts that were neglected, abused, abandoned. All of our parents' trauma histories, we're offering that to ourselves. I am telling you, it is essential to feeling more secure and confident with yourself. Inner child work. Number 8, practice working with your shame part by asking it as though it were another person you were talking to. How did you learn to feel ashamed? From whom or where did you get this message? Then be patient and listen to your shamed part. It might tell you something new. It has a voice. You have a younger part that has a voice that didn't get to have a voice. A lot of us were conditioned out of our authentic voice. And we're trying to find your voice. You're not going to find your voice through your children by living vicariously through them or your grandchildren. That's just icing on the cake to have more joy and connection. You're going to find your voice by doing this deeper work, by healing your trauma and your pain and your shame and your hurt, by stop making other people responsible for saying things just the right way or making you feel loved. Yes, we want that to happen. You are the most important healer in your life. Someone else isn't going to come in and heal you. You're going to do that by going to therapy, by doing these healthy strategies, by facing your past. And people get so scared about that. I'm like, hey, everybody's got a past. Listen, everybody does. And when I say by facing it, all I'm saying is let's have that little boy, little girl, little soul inside, whatever identity you have a voice, be free. We get to freedom through truth, telling the truth about how we feel, not bullying or vomiting on somebody, to yourself. And then that healthy part of yourself can reparent that part and say, oh, honey, thank you for sharing that with me. That's what we need to do as parents. Thank you for sharing that with me. That took a lot of courage. I can imagine how painful that's been for you. Listen to this podcast over and over. Listen to Close the Chapter to really, and I'm not saying this is the only end all be all, to just start really working on that part that can reparent yourself. And number 9, the last one on working through your shame is practice finding and validating your core emotions you have felt as a result of being shamed either in the past or in the present. And we shame ourselves, and we can stop that pattern. We can stop shaming our kids, even though we unconsciously do it. When I do it, I really try to own it. And shame is a word, and guilt and the difference I've taught my children. So we use those words. And I'm like, ooh, should I have taught you about shame? Because now they're like, you're shaming me, Mom. And I'm grateful that they can tell me, but that can evoke my own shame and guilt. So it's important to teach yourself and recognize shame and guilt and the difference, and then teach your children that guilt is about your choices and your behavior, and shame is about yourself feeling like a bad person and not good enough. They kind of work hand in hand, and then how that creates anxiety. And then how to work through that is this nurturing, loving part of you, offering self-compassion and empathy. Offer it to your children, offer it to others. When you offer it to yourself, it's going to flow freely through you to other people. That's why people get drawn to you, because and you're not enabling them. You're offering a tender compassion. So I can speak truth with love and grace and offer empathy. It's not an either or. Some people think, well, I don't agree with what they said. Well, I don't either sometimes, but I can offer empathy to what they might be feeling. And I can also speak truth with love and grace. They don't cancel each other out. I hope that this was helpful to you today to understand the difference between the two, to start recognizing how to work through shame and guilt. Because we can have mom guilt, we can have dad guilt, we can have parental guilt, we can have guilt about our behavior, and then we can have shame about who we are. And it's important that we be intentional with working through that. You can heal it. It's not just going to disappear. I want to make this clear. You're just never not going to feel shame and guilt. No, you will. It's part of being a human. It's how do you recognize it, acknowledge it, and nurture it to move through it to get to the other side. And then be willing to do some deeper work if necessary, some deeper therapy work, some inner child work, and grab the books. That's a place to start. Listen to this podcast. It'll help you on your journey. You might not like every episode. That's okay. Skip on through. I've got some new guests coming up in the next couple of months, and I hope it expands you, helps you evolve, grow, and deepen your self-awareness and self-development, so you feel better and more confident and clear and compassionate towards yourself and others. Thank you for joining me today. I'm cheering you on this evolution. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, BOICE.com. Thanks, and have a great day.